International agencies have joined forces with East African governments in efforts to resolve what has become known as the quelea problem. But a solution has proved elusive. The search for the solution begins with a study of individual birds trapped in nets erected near the roosts. At nightfall, all the quelias within a radius of 20 miles fly in to roost at one place. And in the failing light, it's very difficult for the birds to see the nets. The roost may contain 2 million birds, and the number caught in the nets represents but a small fraction of those that die from natural causes every night. Examination of a reasonable number of birds from a roost can tell the experts which of the 3 known East African populations they've come from. Each population has a characteristic mix of different black mask patterns.
Cranium 4.
Sometimes a few birds with a white mask turn up.
Undeveloped ovary.
The average weight of a bird varies between 1/2 and 8/10 of an ounce, according to age, sex, and the season.
Underweight bird.
Quelias must return to their roosts at night with enough food in their crops to sustain them until the following morning. The contents of this crop reveal exactly what the birds are feeding on. Is it their natural food, grass seeds, or are they raiding crops? A flock of 2 million birds consumes about 5 tons of seed every day.
So, this one.
Molting flight feathers indicate that this flock cannot fly far and must be feeding nearby. The quelea story begins with the onset of the rains, when the seeds the birds have been eating germinate. The sudden drop in food supply forces them to move on. Before leaving, however, the birds gorge themselves on termites, also brought out by the heavy rains, which give them the extra strength they'll need for a flight of more than 350 miles. They fly to where the rains fell a short time before, where the grasses have already matured and set seed, providing the quelea with an abundance of food. In this lush grassland, the social activity of the birds increases. The molt to breeding plumage begins. Soon the red bill of the female will turn yellow and the male's black mask will appear. In a nearby area, other developments are taking place. Another species of weaver birds suddenly flies in and begins to nest. The chestnut weaver is a larger bird, but less numerous. The area it chooses for nesting is often equally attractive to the quelea. The presence of nesting chestnut weavers is generally a good indication that the quelias are not far behind. Small flocks of male quelias appear, flying low and fast. They give no hint of the magnitude of the activity to come. The males are alone, but their song and their plumage show quite clearly that they're ready to breed. The first knot, a thin blade of grass tied firmly around an acacia branch, is the beginning of one nest and a quelea breeding colony. Spontaneously, the small flocks congregate and begin collecting grass. The excitement is infectious. Soon, all the males are caught up in the fever of nest building. Within an hour, 1 million nests are under construction. Every bush within 50 acres is alive with birds. The noise and excited activity draws in flocks of females, whose yellow bills show that they too are ready to breed. Every male now displays and tries to attract a female to his nest. The more vigorous the display, the more chance a male has of acquiring a mate. It's during this stage that mate selection takes place. Aside from displaying, weaving, and collecting grass, the males must also find time to feed themselves. Masked weavers, like the chestnut weavers, are commonly associated with quelea colonies. These, too, are further ahead with their nest building. Within 2 hours, the rings from which the nest will be suspended are complete. The nuptial dance continues. Some males are still trying to attract a female. A second wave of chestnut weavers arrives. This colony is going to be exceptionally large. All the quelias are paired off now. The males stop displaying and throw all their energies into finishing the nests. The first chestnut weavers have completed their nests and have already laid their eggs. A concentration of so many birds collecting grass provides an occasional feast for dwarf mongooses. Stealing nest material is quicker than collecting it, sometimes. Within 12 hours of mating, the first eggs will be laid. Events move fast in a quelea breeding colony, and synchronization is vital. If the birds have mated too soon, or if the males started nest building too late, 1 million eggs would fall through the bottom of the incomplete nests. This would be the end of the colony. For unlike other birds, the quelias will not lay here again if the first egg is lost. While the male goes off to collect more grass, the female molds the nest to shape. It's been only about 2 days since they began, but the nests are well on the way to completion. It's during this stage that mating takes place. The female is constantly at the nest, but makes no contribution to the building. The final task is to complete the protective porch over the entrance. By the end of the second day, the nest is finished. Now the females take possession, spending the night in the nest. On the third day of nest construction, but just 12 hours after mating, they lay the first eggs. The green grass used in the nest soon dries out. For the first time, the full extent of the colony can be seen. Most of the colony is packed into the thick riverine scrub where the nests are almost touching. The rest spills out onto the nearby savanna, less dense, but spread over a much wider area. By now, the females have laid all 3 of their eggs, each a day apart. The males take their turn in the 10-day incubation, which began as soon as the first egg was laid. In the heat of the day, the incubating birds may leave the eggs. Unlike most weaver birds, the queleas do not line their nests. Ventilation keeps the temperature down during the hottest part of the day. When the temperature falls, the birds resume incubation. They change over after feeding. As incubation proceeds, there are developments around the colony which are vital to its success. A vast army of insects has hatched in the fresh grass. These will be the first food of the newly hatched quelea chicks, which cannot digest grass seed for the first 3 days of their lives. Again, synchronization is vital. All the chicks would die if they hatched before the insects were available. In 1 million nests, the first chicks are hatching. The eggshells are removed by the females. The chicks demand food from the moment they hatch. 1 million insects must be found 15 times a day, each one mashed in the bill before feeding. Next day, the second chick arrives. Just as the eggs were laid a day apart, they will hatch a day apart. Now, 2 million insects are needed for each feeding. The following day, the third chicks have hatched, bringing the insect demand up to 45 million a day. Flight feathers have already appeared on the first chick by the time the last one hatches. The hatch is over, and the colony moves into the next phase of its rapid development. Once again, synchronization is vital. The stock of insects around the colony has been heavily depleted, but fields of ripening grass seeds are now available to feed the hungry multitude. New seeds, soft enough to be digested by the tiny chicks. The adult birds may have to fly a few miles to find grass seed at just the right stage of development. They fly out in small flocks, fill their crops with milky seed, and return to the nests. Both parents feed the young. The birds regurgitate the seed with some effort. The semi-liquid meal also provides all the water that the chicks need. By the 5th day, the chicks have the first feathers on their heads. Full for the moment, falling asleep, but always ready for another meal. The acacia thorn bush is not without hazard, but the queleas nest among the vicious thorns for a very good reason. So much activity concentrated in one place has not gone unnoticed. Marabou storks have an uncanny ability to find nesting colonies in the vast expanse of the quelea's range. A quelea colony can provide a lot of easy meals for the steppe eagle and the storks. The marabou is not well equipped for balancing on a thorn bush, but its long bill can reach a large number of nests. Chicks in nests built on the outside of bushes don't have much of a chance. The steppe eagle is a migrant all the way from the Russian steppes, a relative of the golden eagle. It too is out of place on the top of a thorn tree, and lacking the jabbing bill of the marabou, the eagle can only hope to steal. The queleas can't do anything while the storks are there. Nests are being destroyed and chicks consumed at an alarming rate, but the survivors must be fed, even though there's devastation all around. The surviving chicks are now 8 days old, and it's the eagle's turn to take their toll. The chicks fill the nest now, and it's easier for the eagle to get at them. As danger approaches, the chicks fall silent. The weave of the nest is not enough to save the chicks. Ironically, though, it's strong enough to save the eagle from falling to the ground. When an eagle gets right into the bush, he stays for a long time, and the parent quelias are too frightened to feed their young. It's a terrible dilemma, but the rising crescendo of begging calls eventually overcomes the parent's fear of the eagle. Before long, a few quelias are feeding their chicks within inches of the eagle. Once some resume feeding, the rest soon follow. There are some survivors in the damaged nests, and there's a distinct advantage to being the only survivor, a surplus of food. "10 days after hatching, just 22 days since the first knot was tied, the chicks begin to venture out from the nests. They can't fly yet, and the eagles are waiting in increasing numbers. As more and more quelea chicks leave the nests, more and more birds of prey fly in to threaten the very existence of the colony. Each chick struggles to the top of the nest and calls for food. Each time the adults return with food, more chicks are drawn out of the nests. But the parents don't forget the youngest chicks. On this first day out, any chick that strays from the nest platform becomes bewildered and must find his way back. Every time another eagle arrives, the adult quelea scatter nervously. This is the most dangerous time for the chicks. Out of the nest, but unable to fly, their only hope is to remain deep in the thorn bush. The first attempts at flight are watched with great interest by the eagles. Any chick they can frighten out of the bush becomes easy prey. The eagles quickly discover that only a few chicks can be flushed from each bush, so they launch frequent surprise attacks on successive bushes. As opportunity permits, the eagles can catch those adult quelias that carry on feeding the chicks. The next day, the fledglings no longer wait to be fed at the nest platforms, but scramble toward the parents as soon as they land in the bush. This tactic rapidly degenerates into a frantic chase from branch to branch, as begging broods harass the parents relentlessly. The adults are now bringing in about 6 tons of grass seed a day to the hyperactive colony, and all this seed is gathered some distance away. The stalk closest to the colony is left untouched. Instinctively, the birds save this seed for a very special need that will arise later on. Despite the apparent chaos, the adults know and will feed only their own brood. Recognition is probably by call. Although fledglings beg from any adult, nothing will persuade the parents to feed any but their own chicks. This female, with only one of her brood surviving, is quite indifferent to the frantic begging of the other chicks. The overworked female tries to take a rest, but the insistent begging from every direction never stops. In the late afternoon, the adults fly to the nearest water to drink and are watched by yet more predators. After drinking, the adults return to the feeding grounds, this time to fill their crops for the night ahead. Satisfied at last, the chicks are drowsy as night approaches. The male quelias roost on their own, away from the colony, and may be joined by many thousands of non-breeding quelias, as well as birds that have lost their young. If they can, the chicks retreat to the sanctuary of the nests, where they're joined by the females. The next crisis is the sudden arrival of marabou storks in ever greater numbers. Gangs of marauding storks begin surrounding isolated bushes. This change in tactics coincides with the fledglings' first attempts at flight. Catching the more mobile fledglings now requires a greater effort. The increased activity attracts more and more storks. Many fledglings react by trying to fly away. They don't stand a chance. As soon as the easy prey in one bush is finished, the marabous move on to the next, systematically flushing young birds from all the isolated bushes. Even the gentle white stork joins in the carnage. At dawn, the survivors of yesterday's onslaught are blissfully unaware of the traumatic event they must face today. The last stage upon which the success of the colony depends has arrived. Once again, the quelias are in perfect harmony with their habitat. The grass seeds around the colony have all ripened and dropped to the ground. This time, there's no response to the begging call. The adults are congregating quietly and are not feeding their young. When hunger finally drives the juveniles out of the bush, they're led down toward the vast store of dried seed below and given one last feeding by the parents. Remarkably, family groups are still intact. The adults will soon leave their young and fly off in search of the right conditions to start the breeding cycle all over again. Now, the parent's strategy of leaving a rich food source untouched close to the colony becomes apparent. Starving, the juveniles soon find the seed and at once begin feeding themselves. They can fly much better now and are no longer such easy prey. At first light, 32 days after construction of the nest began, all the birds leave the colony. Their numbers more than doubled while they were there. Despite the efforts of predators, some 4 to 5 million birds have survived. The adults will fly far away, but the juveniles will establish roosts nearby and will stay in the area until forced to find new feeding grounds. The bushes are silent. The quelias, the marabous, and the eagles have gone just as suddenly as they arrived. The sturdy little nests have served their purpose and will soon disintegrate. For a while, though, they still bear witness to the events of the past few weeks. Flocks of feeding juveniles roll across the plains in search of food. The rolling motion develops as the leaders settle and are overflown by the birds behind, which then become leaders of the next wave. Although this procedure allows each bird only a short time to feed, the random movement must surely confuse any predators. Numerous water holes are the focal points of life across the plains. Most animals come just to drink and don't linger. Some hang about for no apparent reason. Some marabous are at the water hole too, though they're not drinking. Small flocks of quelea suddenly fly in. They're extremely nervous, but desperate to drink. Only a few of the first flock manage to reach the water's edge before some of them catch sight of a lanner falcon, approaching at more than 60 miles an hour. The flock's instantaneous reaction foils the attack. The falcon's tactics are to separate a bird from the flock and get it away from the bushes. As long as the birds can reach the bushes in time, the predators will be frustrated. The marabous are still waiting. A large flock of quelias arrives from across the plains and funnels straight into the water hole. Without using the bushes, they begin to drink on the wing. Drinking like this is risky, and the marabous know what will happen. The attacks of the hawks will cause many birds to crash into the water. The number of waterlogged quelias falling easy prey to the marabous and eagles hardly diminishes the size of the moving flocks. The birds will not stay long at the water hole before the need for food drives them on. But no matter where they go, they will always be pursued by predators. The erratic rainfall pattern of these semi-arid regions determines the direction of the various flocks as they leave the breeding area. Sometimes they all go the same way, but often they take different routes. Although unnoticed by man in their natural habitats, the quelias may now attract attention as a pest. Any ripening cereal crops lying in their path offer an irresistible food supply. Wheat, sorghum, millet, and rice, all are targets. To the farmer, a large flock of quelias approaching his fields is a dreadful sight. It can mean total loss of the crops. But although the quelias may spell disaster for the individual farmer, it's now known that national losses rarely exceed 1% of total production. Other pests and diseases cause far greater damage, but attract less attention because they're less visible. It's much easier to vent your anger at a flock of birds than at a fungus or a green fly. These flocks of birds, in fact, are not quelias at all. They're chestnut weavers, but the farmer always blames the quelea. Whether it's chestnut weavers or quelias eating his crops, something must be done. In the croplands, the birds often roost in the tall trees around farm villages. The firebomb is one way of getting them. While a government quelea control unit prepares the charges, local farm hands watch nonchalantly. They've seen it all before. The quelea have often roosted at this site in years past. The first birds fly in as preparation continues. "12 pounds of dynamite is placed under a drum containing 40 gallons of mixed gasoline and diesel fuel. Instantaneous fuses link a series of charges. It's a specialist's job to place the explosives so that the burning fuel is blasted to just the right height. By 7 p.m., all the birds have arrived. A 100,000 birds died, well over 90% of this roost. Poisonous sprays are another way of destroying large roosts. This is a more dangerous method, both for the pilot and because of its effect on the environment. The trouble is that it's impossible to apply the poison with absolute precision. Obstructions may hinder the flight path, or wind currents may blow the chemicals off the target area. Any poison capable of killing quelias will kill other animals as well, some of which are beneficial to man. And the use of poison could have irreversible effects, which in the long run may be far worse than the damage done by the quelias. The risk is justified only when and where they are causing severe crop losses. In their natural habitat, the quelias can be left alone. There they face population controls that are far more severe than any man could impose. Their numbers are always in balance with the prevailing conditions, and the balance is very sensitive. Even the seasonal variations in food supply kill more birds each year than any control operation. Overall, the quelea population seems remarkably stable. Experts say there are the same number of birds around today as there were 30 years ago when control operations began. Periodically, successive years of plenty produce a population explosion among the quelias. But even this is no cause for long-term alarm. It's inevitable that the population will crash in the first bad year. Only a minute fraction of the quelea population ever invades the croplands, and it's only in the croplands that efforts to combat the birds make any sense at all. It's simply not possible to control quelea numbers throughout their vast range. The quelea, a very good example of a creature that has evolved a way of life that enables it to survive in a difficult and dangerous environment.
Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and America's gas industry, developing new sources of gas energy and ways to use gas more efficiently for more than 160 million people across America.
Just what does a television director do? You'll find out on The Television Makers, next, here on 11.